Hi, I'm Larry Higgins with Skip Genie, and we're back at the Propelio Academy talking about skip tracing and more specifically talking with owners. So in this section we're going to be talking about talking with owners, and some of the points we'll cover are how to respond to some of the frequently asked questions, paying attention to what the owners or the sellers are talking to you, different things to listen for and pay attention to, how to handle no, how to kind of reply or respond to that, because you will get that occasionally, and just general rapport building skills. Okay, so talking to owners, you're going to get some what I call the frequently asked questions. And first and foremost, without hesitation, the number one question you're likely to get is, how did you get my number? A lot of people are just curious, and a lot of times they just don't realize how accessible phone numbers truly are. So let's just say somebody says, how did you get my number? Without hesitation, somebody asks me that, and like, oh, I use sites like Spokeo or Intellius. They help us get in touch with people. They give us their contact information, and I'll just keep going. Don't pause, don't hesitate, just say it with confidence. Even if they've never heard of Spokeo or Intellius, 95% of the time they're just going to accept it. So just, that's it. Hey, how'd you get my phone number? Oh, I use websites like Spokeo or Intellius. They provide contact information for people, and just keep going. And I use those two specifically because anybody can Google them, anybody can sign up. It's just, if that owner or that seller were to look them up, they just look so harmless. That's why I use those specifically. Another question you'll probably get is, why do you think I want to sell? Well, say it's a pre-foreclosure, or there's a ton of distress. Me personally, I don't like to say, well, I saw you don't pay your bills, so your house is about to get foreclosed on. I'm not ever going to say that. My personal approach is just like this. Well, I really didn't have any idea. Like I said, this is kind of out of the blue. I just wanted to see, I'm looking in the area. I just wanted to see if you had any interest in selling. If they're interested in selling, they'll let you know. You don't have to say, hey, I know you don't pay your property taxes and you haven't in 10 years. You look like you would want to sell at a discount. That's not how you need to reply. It's just real simple. Oh, I had no idea if you're interested or not. Like I said, I'm just looking in the area. I wanted to see if maybe you would like to get an offer. Another one, especially when you're dealing with heirs, or how did you know I was related to them? You could just say, hey, I found the obituary, or I just saw you were listed as a likely relative on one of these websites that provide contact information, and just keep going. Again, don't stop, don't hesitate. Don't say, hey, I spent 5 hours skip tracing and digging into obituaries and probate records. Just stay with confidence and keep going. You may get really specific, say, oh, I actually found the obituary where you were listed as the son or the daughter or the wife or something to that effect. So that's just some of the more frequent questions you'll get, and just the basic responses, how to reply to those. Okay, so talking to owners, again, I can't stress enough, pay attention to what they're telling you. On more than one occasion, I've had somebody say something like, I'm calling about a property, and they'll say, well, which one are you calling about? Or which one are you asking about? Just hearing that phrase, which one, automatically now I know there's multiple involved, at least on their end. They either own, or there's something going on with more than just one property. Or they may say, oh, we sold that one. They didn't say we sold it, they say we sold that one. So again, that implies that was one of several, or one of, who knows, a dozen. And just absorbing that and saying, well, if somebody says which one, or we sold that one, I say, oh, well, are there others? Do you have anything else you'd like to sell? Or if you sold that one, did you have other properties listed, or you're looking to sell in the future? Just start the conversation, and it can lead to deals. One example we did was a multifamily property we were able to get locked up. We were calling about a house. The owner had died, and she left it to two of her sons. And we got in touch with one of the sons, and when we called about the house, he said, oh, well, we sold that one. And naturally we said, well, that one, or was there more than one property? He said, well, there's a small apartment complex, but we've got problems with it. You probably wouldn't be interested in it. And it was very distressed, and there were some major complications with it, but we were interested, and it's something that's still open and alive on our books right now that we're working on clearing some matters up. Long story short, we may have a hell of a multifamily deal. It's not a home run, but it's I think it's an 8-unit complex that we're going to pick up at a steep discount just because we asked that question. Is there more than one property, or do you have other properties? Another one, dealing on a house in Houston, we called and found the owner. It was an inherited property. The father had died, the son inherited it. And had we called sooner, he would have sold us that house. But we called about the house that he inherited, and he said, well, no, I'm actually just finishing the rehab on it. Had you called me 6 months ago, I would have sold it to you, but I went ahead and did the rehab, so now I'm going to list it. Okay, fair enough. But then he said, well, do you buy anywhere else? Are you just in Houston? We said, oh, sure. Do you have another property that you would like to sell? He said, well, yeah, would you buy in Richmond, which Richmond is just southwest of Houston? Of course, my response was, of course. So good, not a home run deal, but we ended up, I think we made $15,000 or $17,000 on that just by paying attention and starting, keep the conversation going. When you're talking to owners, here it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to hear this response. When you're calling truly distressed properties, you'll call them, or you may have to text them as well, and they'll either tell you, I don't own that property anymore, you need to talk to the county or to the bank or the lender. And so right off the bat, what that tells me is the owner or the heir of that owner thinks that the property's been foreclosed on already, or in some cases they may think they gave it to the county or gave it to the lender, but they don't understand the legalities of conveying title and taking ownership. So they still own it even though they may not realize it. Hearing that alone should grab your attention immediately, and just know that mentally, if they tell you the bank or the county owns the property now, mentally they've accepted zero for this property. If they don't even think they own it, they can't make any money off of it. So by all means, you want to make a deal happen, because if you can come in with even $1,000, that's $1,000 more than they anticipated they were going to make off of that property. Again, it's not a matter of if, but when. If you call enough distressed properties, you will get this response. The bank owns it or the county owns it. Do not accept it at face value. Just know you have a hell of a lead right now and get it done. Those can be some great money makers. Prime example, an inherited property I called on, I think it was about a year ago. Couldn't get in touch with one of the heirs, the owner. Again, owners died. I'm getting in touch with the heirs, and couldn't get any of the daughters on the phone. Finally get one to reply to me, or she wouldn't call me back, so I sent her a text message. She texted me back, and her response was, we don't own it anymore, the bank owns it. And I was all over that lead just like that, because I knew, I'd done my research. I knew they weren't paying on the loan, but I knew the bank hadn't auctioned it off, that they could still legally sell that property. Again, not a home run deal, but it was a $40,000 deal. That's a pretty solid day, especially in the Houston market. $40,000 assignment fee is pretty substantial. When you're talking to owners, look, they're not all home runs by any means. They're not even all yeses. You're going to get no's. But don't just take no and hang up and be done. By no, I mean they say, not now, no thanks, or just not interested. So, some of your different responses can be, let's say I asked Jane if she'd like to sell her property. She says, I'm not really interested. My typical response is, hey, I understand completely, but, are you sure you wouldn't at least want to get a cash offer from me? At least you would know, if you decide later that you would like to sell it, at least you'd know what I'd be willing to pay. Just something along those lines. You don't have to repeat that verbatim, but you can use something like that to try and keep moving forward, keep the conversation going, get them that offer, and just keep them on kind of a drip campaign. Or you may say, if they tell you no, well, hey, I understand. Is it okay if I follow up with you in a month or 3 months or 6 months? Get a little commitment from them that they say it's okay to call them, and just put them on a follow-up campaign. And another thing that very few people do, and I don't do enough, is, hey, I understand you don't want to sell, but would you happen to know anybody else that's looking to sell? And you will get leads that way. Just adding that question at the end of the conversation, you never know they may have a family member, they may have a friend, or they may say, I don't know anybody, but there's this house that, it's halfway burned down. It's on the other side of my neighborhood. It's a hazard. Do you think you could go buy that? Something like that. You never know what kind of response you'll get. So definitely ask, do you know anybody else that's looking to sell? Okay, part of cold calling, and sometimes you're doing a lot of calling and you can't keep track of everything, especially if you're doing manual calls. Say you went and called 500 phone numbers in one day or one morning, who knows. And then you get a phone call and somebody says, hey, I was returning the call, you called about my property. Well, unless you have a photographic memory, you're not going to know what property they're talking about. This does happen. Trust me, when you start calling, people will call you back and they're just going to, maybe they leave you a message or maybe you answer the phone. You're going to have no idea who's calling you back because you've called so many you couldn't keep them straight. So I've learned this through, because I went through this. People call me back. I had no idea what to say, who they were with, what property they were associated with. It got confusing. So what I do now, if I'm doing a bunch of calls, somebody calls me back. Oh, I'm sorry. Could you tell me what property, the address of the property I referenced, or the name of the owner? I've been calling on several of them today, and I just can't keep them straight. Or I've called on 2 or 3 of them, something like that. Don't make it sound like you're calling thousands of people or thousands of numbers. Just 2, 3, 5, whatever. And people understand that. If you had to remember 5 addresses or 5 names, you probably couldn't keep it straight either. So that's an approach that works. Or you may say, hey, I was trying to get in touch with relatives or friends of the property owner, and I'm not sure which one you were, but can you tell me the name or the address, the name of the person or the address that I mentioned in the message? Something like that. Again, straightforward. They can understand that. Keeping names and addresses are hard to do. So just take that approach when you get those questions like that. When you're cold calling and talking to these owners, you have to remember this is a different call dynamic than an inbound call. By that I mean, if you're doing internet marketing, direct mail, billboards, whatever it is, if somebody calls you, they're obviously motivated to some extent to sell their house. Well, with what we're doing, we think they're distressed. We think there's a higher likelihood they will be motivated to sell. We don't know that. So we're calling them out of the blue. They didn't ask for us to call. We're just taking it upon ourselves to go unburden them of these properties we think are weighing them down, basically. But again, it's just a different dynamic. Inbound, they're responding to your marketing. Outbound, we're just out of the blue contacting them. Biggest thing I can say is take your time. Don't rush them to try and get an answer. Don't try and have an answer, do you want to sell within a minute? Even within 2 minutes. And if they're talkative, if they're asking you, filling you out on kind of what your background is or what your plans or intentions are, take your time. If they want to talk about the weather, talk about the weather. If the guy's got a bad hip, talk about how that time you banged up your knee real bad and were on crutches. Just try and build rapport in any way you can. Look for common experiences, anything in common that you might have. It can really change, it can really help to build trust and establish rapport with these people. An example of this would be the house that we did off of Bethel. This one helped us a lot because this house was on a common mailing list. They were getting tons and tons of mail, but we were calling anyway. I got in touch with one of the heirs. It was a brother and a sister. Sister lived in the house. Brother lived about 90 miles away. He definitely wanted to sell. The timing wasn't quite right because he had some health issues and he didn't want to have to call his sister and tell her she had to move. He wanted to do it in person, but he just couldn't afford to keep paying the taxes. And as a matter of fact, he quit paying the taxes. They were behind. So we had multiple conversations, and this took place over the course of 2 or 3 months. And the time, just life events. There was a funeral that came up. He had a surgery, but I just looked for every opportunity to build rapport. He grew up in Houston, not far from our office. We talked about that area, that part of Houston. One of the times that we were supposed to call, it got delayed. He had to have surgery. It was a hernia surgery. hey, I've had a hernia surgery. We compared recovery time. I mean, I looked at anything I could to build rapport. So when they were ready to sell the house, out of the blue, maybe 6 months after we started the conversation, his son calls me, introduces himself, says, my dad said we're selling. He put me in charge, told us to get 3 offers. And he said to make sure that you are one of the people we get an offer from because he likes you and he trusts you. He talked to you on the phone several times. The other people, if you remember in one of the previous segments, I talked about the yellow letter lottery. They just picked 2 letters out of the stacks of mail they were getting. They called those people to get offers. And then us as well. We were the third one. We were, in the seller's words, we were substantially lower than the other offers, but they still went with us because we had that trust, that built that rapport, and we provided a lot of value in solving a lot of other problems besides just money. So the long story on that, long story short, it was a $45,000 deal for us. So again, just remember, take your time, build rapport, and listen to these people. Talking with the owners, we've talked a lot about paying attention to age and things like that. I'm very, very leery of calling anybody, in their 80s or older, and many people are still very sharp and no issues at that age, but I never want to be accused of taking advantage of an elderly person. And I'm never going to do it intentionally, but if you're calling on the elderly like that, you put yourself in a position where, whether it's intentional or not, you still could get accused of it. An example of this was a house that we did off of Aves in Houston. I remember our caller got a lady on the phone, and she said she was interested in selling, so I got on the phone with her. I started asking her basic questions about the property, and she was a little forgetful about some minor things, but didn't really set off any alarms for me. She, like I tell people, she reminded me of just kind of like my grandmother. Forgetful about some small stuff, inconsequential, but still, no major flags. That was on a Wednesday. On a Friday, I called back to confirm our appointment for Saturday. Well, on Friday, her granddaughter answers and says, well, that was my grandmother you talked to. I'm her granddaughter, and my grandmother has dementia. And as soon as those words came out of her mouth, I was floored. And I started telling her, look, I'm sorry, so sorry. I had no idea. And before I could keep going, the granddaughter said, no, I believe you. She had a good day on Wednesday. But, I wouldn't have done this appointment, but because my grandmother's done it, we're gonna do the appointment on Saturday and you can come look at the house. We got the deal, but the real lesson for me in that whole case was be very, very careful talking to the elderly. That could have just as easily gone the other way, and the granddaughter could have accused me of trying to steal her grandmother's house or something like that. Didn't go that way at all, but it could have. And they were actually very, very happy with the way the results they got, the ease of the transaction, and the price that they got out of us. So once again, my name's Larry Higgins. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at larry@skipgenie.com or just submit your questions or comments in the comment section below. And if not, we'll see you on the next section.